Hey, so in my last video, I said this. I feel like the seeker-friendly model of churches has done a disservice to modern-day evangelism. And in today's video, I want to expound upon that idea. But first, I just want to say thank you for all the support on my previous video. I knew it would get some kind of response, but I didn't expect it to be as overwhelmingly positive as it was. All the text and phone calls and even comments down below on that video were super encouraging to keep going. And so here we go. I want to expound upon that idea that the seeker-friendly church has done a disservice to modern day evangelism. So first, let's define what the seeker-friendly movement or a seeker-friendly church is. It says here, according to Google, that it's an approach to evangelism where church services and outreach are designed to appeal to non-Christians and those interested in Christianity by creating a welcoming, non-intimidating, and relevant environment. And key characteristics include a professional production, inoffensive language, a focus on felt needs, and strategic marketing. Now, if you ask me straight up, TJ, what's the problem with that? I would tell you, well, nothing, at least at first. These churches have done a lot of good. In fact, they have lowered the barrier of entry to Christianity, which honestly should never have a barrier to entry anyway. The entry to Christianity is just a relationship with Jesus. And I think some churches have made that very difficult. And these churches, these seeker-friendly churches, have brought people in record numbers. They've baptized thousands, millions of people in record numbers. And they've done a really great job of making heaven crowded, which is the Great Commission and the point in following Jesus. The problem comes when people don't realize that you are responsible for your own discipleship and spiritual formation. It can't all be left on the shoulders of your pastor. I've spent about 14 years working in student ministry on and off, and one thing I tell parents is I believe student ministry is here to partner with you in the spiritual development of your teenager. We can't be the main or the only source of biblical teaching or representation that your kid gets. That comes from you as the parent. You have infinitely more time with your teenager than we do. And there's this saying that, well, if you only get fed spiritually or fed physically on Wednesdays and Sundays, well, you would die. However, I do believe that your pastor has a responsibility to lead you towards that discipleship. Your pastor should be leading you towards how to study Scripture on your own, how to put your faith into practice through serving and communicating the gospel with other people. So the problem comes when you have a church that never moves beyond that seeker-friendly content and their primary objective each and every week is filling seats. If all you ever get is the everything is awesome gospel, well, when things stop being awesome for a season, it's going to be so much easier for you to walk away from your faith when you're presented with hardships or times of suffering or maybe even theological ideas that your church never taught you about in the first place. And I also believe that this type of shallow teaching and shallow churches has a direct correlation to the epidemic of deconstruction that we have in our culture. We're going to look at this passage in the book of Hebrews. And Hebrews is a very interesting book in the Bible because we simply don't know who wrote it. It's written very similarly to how this guy named Paul wrote a lot of letters or epistles in the New Testament. But the difference is he would always sign his name with his letters as to prove his authorship. And the writer of Hebrews doesn't do that. But it's also not written exactly like a letter. It could be written more like an essay or, as how we would know it, a sermon. And so it would have been atypical for someone to put their name at the beginning of that. Most people ascribe Hebrews to be written by one of two different guys who would have studied under Paul at some point, and they have a clear understanding of the Old Testament and the original language in which the Old Testament was written. You see that throughout the book of Hebrews. There's also a really interesting theory that a woman wrote Hebrews, and that's why the author never reveals himself, because women in the ancient Near East, well, they didn't have a platform of authority, and so they wouldn't have been taken as seriously, and so they wrote it anonymously. Now, historically, and based on the evidence that we have, it doesn't support that a whole lot, but what would be cool is if we could prove that, what would that do to some of those fundamentalists out there who say that women can't serve in ministry? That would be, pretty cool. But what we do know about the book of Hebrews is that it was written to a group of Christians. Well, they weren't Christians yet. That term would come later. But it was written to a group of people who followed Jesus. They were Jewish. They were Jewish, but then they saw Jesus as the Messiah. All the Jews were looking forward to a Messiah. And this group believed that Jesus of Nazareth was that Messiah. And unfortunately, they lived in a predominantly Jewish culture. And so all of the Jews surrounding them were pressuring them and even at times persecuting them into abandoning following Jesus as the Messiah and coming back to being Jewish. The writer of Hebrews is talking about how Jesus is now that high priest. He is the intercessor between us and God. We don't need a high priest to offer sacrifices on our behalf anymore or to talk to God on our behalf. Like, we have direct access to our Creator. And then in chapters 5 and 6, we're going to get into the word here, but it's interesting. I got to tell you, it goes from the end of 5 into 6. Remember, the original readers of this would have read this as maybe a letter, maybe an essay. They wouldn't have had chapters and verses to divide it, and so they would have just read this in one sitting. I'm going to start in Hebrews 5, verses 11 through 14. After talking about Jesus being the great high priest, he says, "We have much to say about this, but it's hard to make it clear to you because you no longer try to understand. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil." When my son was born, he survived off of milk. At some point, my wife was able to pump, and I was able to feed him through a bottle, but nonetheless, he only existed off of milk. In fact, when you're a baby, until you're a year old, there's certain things that you can't digest, like water or honey. It's very important that babies and infants only get milk. But at some point, it became clear that in order for his body and his systems and his bones to grow adequately, he was going to need more substance. And so he started with pureed food, and he had this little plastic spoon that he would use to eat mashed up avocado and peas and bananas and stuff like that. After a year, he was able to digest things like water and honey, and now he eats solid foods now, like chicken nuggets and taco soup, and he gets it all over himself, but it's cute, right? Because he's a baby. But as an almost 2-year-old, there's no way he could survive off of only milk. That's true for you too. Could you imagine me, a 38-year-old? I'm like, no thanks, I have my milk. Oh, that's silly. You would absolutely die. And what the writer of Hebrews is saying here is the exact same thing, that yes, there was a time for these surface level elementary teachings, and that was good and all, but you cannot have a healthy faith in Jesus and stay on the surface. Jumping into chapter 6, just verses 1 through 3, even though the rest of the chapter deals with what I'm talking about. "Therefore, let us move beyond the elementary teachings about Christ and be taking forward to maturity, not laying again the foundation of repentance from acts that lead to death, and of faith in God, instruction about cleansing rites, the laying on of hands, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. And God permitting, we will do so." He's saying, yes, there is a time where we need to go back and we need to revisit these things, but you shouldn't forget the things that you learned. You should continue to move deeper and deeper into your understanding of your faith. The author's saying you don't have to start over. You just need to go a little bit deeper. You need to grow up a little bit. The author is going on to warn people against falling away. And I believe that he uses these two things back to back, like how deep you're willing to go in your faith and warning against falling away, because like I said earlier, if you only keep that shallow level of faith, man, when life does what life does, it's so much easier to walk away. At the end of the chapter, he says that Christ is the anchor for our soul. He is firm and secure. And when we put our faith in him and we trust in him and we go deeper in that understanding, in that relationship, it's like an anchor for our soul. It holds us down to our Creator. It's almost as if the writer of Hebrews is saying exactly what I said. There's a direct correlation from people who take their faith seriously and take it deeper than the elementary teachings, and those that eventually would fall away. So I was teaching students about Jonah recently, and I said, listen, here's the thing about Jonah is if you've ever gone to children's ministry or VBS, you've probably heard Jonah chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, right? There's this guy who God calls him to do something. He runs away. He gets thrown overboard, swallowed by a giant fish. The fish vomits Jonah up on dry land. He goes to Nineveh. He preaches to Nineveh, and everyone in Nineveh, from the king to the animals, is saved. Boom, the end. Happy story. Except there's a fourth chapter of Jonah that we don't talk about with children because it's kind of depressing. See, Jonah was racist against the Ninevites. The Ninevites and the Israelites hated each other. And Jonah explicitly says, I knew, God, that you would save them, and I didn't want that. I didn't want them to have the same freedom and love and mercy and grace that you gave to us. Like, that's for us, not for them. But you don't want to go into an elementary school classroom and say, hey guys, Jonah was a racist. That would be terrible. And it just further proves the point that there's a time and a place for the elementary surface level seeker movement teachings. But if you only ever stay there, it's very dangerous for your faith and for your eternity. I wrote down some notes. I said, the current climate doesn't require seeker-friendly programming. We're in a season where people are seeking the truth on their own, and they want deeper, meaningful faith than just the vanilla bubblegum gospel that they've been getting. Give it to them, or they'll find it somewhere else. Because of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, people are pouring into churches to hear what you have to say, to hear about Jesus of Nazareth and why Charlie loved him so much. Guys, I can't say this enough. This literally happened at our church, and it's happening at your church. Because of world events right now, people are going to church to hear the gospel. They want to know why people love Jesus so much. And it's your responsibility to give that to them. Like, if you're watching this and you're a pastor, like, don't hear me say you should never preach a seeker-friendly movement message ever again, because you absolutely should, because we know that people are going to come to church for no other reason than the fact that it's Christmas or Easter or back to school or you're having some event or some giveaway. Yes, account for the fact that there might be tons of new baby or non-believers in your midst, and you should definitely preach messages that reach them. But if you only ever stay there and you don't take your flock any deeper than the shallow end of the pool, then shame on you. So what should you do with this information that I gave you today? Well, I would start by reading books and watching sermons. Whether you're a pastor or just a believer that wants to get some different takes on your faith, or maybe dive a little bit deeper into Christianity and doctrine and things like that, I would encourage you to read books, watch sermons, listen to podcasts by trusted Christian men or women who are putting out content that you can trust. You have to stay away from the Creflo Dollars and the Kenneth Copelands and the Joel Osteens. I'm just telling you, if they're asking you for money, probably stay away from them. Now, tithing is important, and that's probably a good video for another time on my thoughts on tithing and why it's still relevant and why it's still super important, and it's a biblical discipline that you can learn and grow in. But I'm just telling you that if you watch 2 or 3 messages and it's all about money and my private jets, beware. So who is it for me? I'll tell you my big 3 right now are Philip Anthony Mitchell, Levi Lusko, and Mark Driscoll in that order. And if you look into the 3 of those dudes and listen to their sermons, you will realize that those are vastly different preachers. And I think that's important to have a variation on it. Don't listen to if you're a Baptist, don't only listen to Southern Baptist preachers. I'm a Restoration Movement guy. I don't only listen to Restoration Movement preachers. So variation is good. And Romans 12:2 says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Like, that comes with everything. Whether you're a Christian or not, you should be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You should always be seeking knowledge and truth and deeper understanding of things about this world and about yourself. If you're a pastor watching this, if you're a Sunday school teacher or a small group leader, this is what I would say. Don't lead your people in circles around the desert. Lead them to the promised land. Trust me when I say this. They can handle it. When's the last time you preached on covenant theology? When's the last time you did a series on eschatology? Now listen, not every sermon has to be some seminary lecture. And in fact, if they are, you're going to lose half your people, including myself, because I'm not trying to fall asleep on Sunday morning, but your people can handle deeper truths and doctrine, and you should give it to them. And if your pastor is not giving it to you, then you need to search it out and take your faith to another level. It's time for Christians to grow up. So I would encourage you to do what it takes to grow up in your faith. And let me tell you this, let me be clear. Just don't give up. Find a faith community that will encourage you, that will come alongside you to help build you up and give you opportunities to live your faith out through service, through teaching, through learning. Find a community that preaches and supports biblical truths and will help you live those out. Like I said, we're living in unprecedented times right now where people's approach to church and the Bible are changing. A couple weeks ago, before we went into the Bridge of Gratitude to close out our church service, I said this.
Church, if there's ever been a time in your life to be bold in your faith, it's this season that we're in right now. So we're about to sing with all our chest that you have a lion inside of your lungs. And whatever you're facing at work, whatever you're facing at home or at school, you don't have to be afraid anymore. It's time for the light to shine in the darkness and let the darkness retreat for once. Let's sing this together, church. So come on, my soul.
Guys, the darkness is fleeing, and we have to stay on the offensive. And the best way to do that is to be more secure in your faith by taking it to the next level. So what I'm trying to say here is, it's time for Christians to grow up a little bit. My next upload will be a sermon that I'm preaching next Sunday here in church on anxiety. And if statistics are correct, then this will be a message that over half of all Americans can relate to in some capacity. And I'm really excited about that message. And as always, leave me comments or shoot me a DM with any questions you might have. It might make it easier for me to have content to make videos on. And with all that being said, I want to say two things. Number one, I love you. And number two, we'll talk soon.